When love goes wrong, it can be a dangerous game. Jealousy consumes a woman and spits out a killer.
He was tossing her aside. This was not tolerable.
Best friends conspire to destroy a rival.
It was what I'd call a frenzied attack.
And a jilted wife takes lethal revenge.
That's like setting off a bomb. It's like shooting the high-power rifle.
Nothing will kill a relationship faster than jealousy. Hey. Was like pouring gasoline on their proverbial fire. That's the time when everyone should have left.
Robin O'Neill knows all about the real estate market in Townsend, Vermont. She's one of the elected property listers.
The listers have a very important job of maintaining and assessing the properties for tax value throughout the year.
Howdy.
Hey, Steve. Hi, Robin. I brought the brochure for you to look at.
Thanks. Well, sit down.
In 2013, Robin is interested in the value of one particular property.
You've undervalued my home.
The market's a little slow at the moment.
Don't tell me about the market. It's my job.
She decided that she was going to move from Vermont to Texas to live with her sister.
No. Redo the photos. The lighting is all wrong.
The move to small-town Vermont hasn't worked out for the 62-year-old divorcee from Texas.
Robin did not make friends easily. She was a little standoffish. Many thought her behavior indicated that she thought she was better than everyone else in town.
She was difficult to get along with. I think that ended up leading to her departure.
Ooh, save me.
But one colleague, 60-year-old Steve Lott, finds this feisty woman intriguing.
It is not funny.
Yeah, it is. You are. Anybody home?
And here. Oh, Steve, thank you.
No, happy to help.
Stephen assisted Robin in packing up her belongings so she could move to Texas.
You'll be sorry.
They say opposites attract, and that certainly happened here. Stephen was very much liked in the community, loved even, gregarious, friendly.
Put it back.
Really?
Robin was none of those things.
You met any cowboys lately?
As if.
The odd couple are about to discover absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Stephen was calling her all the time, and she was giggling on the phone like some schoolgirl.
Stop it.
Her sister couldn't believe how much time they spent on the phone and how they were just like little teenagers.
The couple decide there's only one thing to do.
Why don't you come back to Vermont?
Oh, and live where?
Robin should come back to her old job with a new fiancé.
Okay.
Steve was likely looking for companionship.
Yeah, we'll talk soon.
His 3 children were grown up, and Robin was able to provide that to him.
Everything started out really well. They were getting along, they were loving being together.
To Robin and Steve.
Stephen delights in sharing his fiancée with friends and loved ones.
You see my engagement ring?
Very nice.
So when's the wedding?
Don't forget we got that fishing trip coming.
Oh, there's no way I'd miss that.
He was very friendly, very outgoing, had a lot of friends, liked to hang out with his kids and his friends.
What?
We will talk later.
But Robin doesn't like sharing her man.
I'll get some more drinks.
Excuse me.
She wasn't a heavy person. She changed the way that their father was as far as being able to hang out with his friends and family.
Eventually, they felt unwelcome visiting their father because of Robin's behavior and mouth.
Steve learns to keep his bride-to-be happy, she needs his undivided attention. So there's more trouble when one of his oldest friends, Adair, returns to town.
I didn't know you were back.
Thought I would surprise you.
Ain't you gonna introduce us?
Sorry, Adair. This is my fiancée, Robin.
Really? Congratulations. You got yourself a good man.
So Stephen and Adair were friends for 25 years because they lived right around the corner from each other.
Adair was a very close friend and was very attractive.
It's so great to see you.
Robin just didn't find that appropriate. She thought that men should not have women friends.
How's Doug?
And just then, it all fell apart.
I mean, she was a jealous person. She was very jealous of Steve, you know, when he would talk to his friends, especially if it was a female friend.
Because she perceived her as a threat. Truth is, if Adair and Stephen were ever going to be together, it would have happened years before. They were just friends.
Robin was so certain that he was having an affair with Adair that she started stalking the both of them and following him.
Obsessed, Robin keeps a detailed diary of Steve's every move with his friend.
That is insecurity on steroids.
Pretty good. What are your efforts?
This significantly put a lot of pressure.
Very well with Robin.
November 18th, 2014, in Townsend, Vermont. Romance is dead.
The relationship is disintegrating, it's falling apart. There are issues of jealousy, there are issues of trust.
Stephen Lott has had enough of fiancée Robin O'Neill's unfounded jealousy.
Robin and Stephen didn't have a long enough history together for him to be more forgiving of her bad behavior.
The engagement's off.
He just said to her, "We are disengaged." And that was it. He wanted her to move out. Well, Robin didn't take that well at all. And in fact, she was absolutely furious.
And it's because of her, isn't it? Isn't it?
Get out.
Things are about to get messy around the office.
He was tossing her aside. This was not tolerable.
Can I have a word in private?
Robin plans to get even.
Robin actually displayed to a friend bruises that she claimed Stephen gave her.
It's Steve. He's been abusing me. Robin, that's dreadful.
Her friend said, "Do you want me to take photos?" Robin said, "No, it's never going to happen again."
And things are no better at home.
There was a lot of drinking.
That was one hell of a trip. Hi, James.
My machine's broken again.
Oh, yeah. Any excuse to save me.
I'll go put it on.
Steve's son, 28-year-old Jameis, arrives to find a dysfunctional family.
Jameis had come over to the house to do his laundry.
Robin hit on one of Stephen's friends.
So, the engagement is off.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, now I'm free to sleep with you.
That's not happening.
He rejected her.
When she got rebuffed, she went upstairs and started breaking things, making a lot of noise.
That's the time when everyone should have left.
That night, Robin snaps.
She picks up her gun and shoots Jameis in the back of the head. Then she turns the gun on Stephen.
Robin! Robin, stop!
And starts firing.
Robin O'Neill shot Steve 12 different times. There were 7 shots to the head, 1 shot to the chest, and 4 shots to the groin area.
She unloaded that gun into him. I hate you. I'm going to destroy you. This is it.
In return for love and companionship, Steve loses his son and his life. After murdering the men in cold blood,
I just shot Steve and his son.
Robin phones a friend.
She reported that Steve is in a pool of blood by my feet and Jameis is in a separate pool of blood underneath the table.
And calmly ties up loose ends.
And I need you to mind my dog.
She was concerned about her dog. She wanted to make sure her colleague would agree to take care of her dog.
She appeared to be more concerned about her dog than the fact that she had just shot and killed 2 people.
Get down!
Though she's planted a series of domestic abuse allegations, Robin blows it on that fateful night.
The battered woman defense may have carried some weight if she hadn't killed a totally innocent person that had nothing to do with her.
In 2017, Robin O'Neill is found guilty of 2 counts of aggravated murder and sentenced to life in prison. No possibility of parole.
And she was certainly very remorseful that Jameis is dead, but she's never taken any responsibility for killing Steve.
Stephen Lott only ever wanted the best for his family, his friends, and his new love. Robin returned his affection with paranoia, jealousy, and rage.
Robin wanted to kill Stephen for not attending to her the way she wanted. It was pure jealousy. It's a crime of obsession and barbarity. One of the most brutal I've ever seen between women.
In 2013, in the sleepy upscale village of Helmshore, England, 32-year-old Sarah Williams meets up with her unlikely BFF, 53-year-old Kit Walsh.
Wow, check out.
She was a biker and she was 20 years older than Sarah.
Sarah and Kit were an odd couple, to be sure.
But what both have in common is contempt for men.
Sarah used men for what they could do for her, and that means dollar signs.
How are you?
I'm good. You look wonderful, love.
She could get men to love her and lust after her, and she loved every moment of it.
The pair's favorite male target is a 75-year-old who's been supporting Sarah since she was a teenager.
I'm coming. I've got to go, Daddy's here. Hey, how are you?
She didn't want to let David go because he was writing the checks.
She saw him very much as a sugar daddy.
Here you go, your favorite.
Thank you.
He was married to someone else.
Did you ski today?
I blitzed it,
That's my girl.
but this would be more fun.
Not only did he see to it she had a lavish lifestyle,
Let me convince you.
he actually put money in her account every week, just so she could have fun.
Why don't you sleep over?
You know I can't.
Anything that she wanted, you know, within reason, she'd get. She kind of never had to make do. Everything was there.
It's open.
I rushed straight over. What's up?
How's the trip to Switzerland sound?
Oh, really?
While Sarah doesn't want for money,
Is David paying? Of course.
You can get a man to do whatever you want.
Not everything.
her closest friend knows she longs for something else.
In Kit, she had someone she could talk to, and she could say things that she wouldn't share with anybody else.
For Sarah, sex is easy. Love is more elusive. Until she meets yet another new man, 57-year-old Ian Johnston.
Ian Johnston was formerly a fireman. He was an expert skier. Very soon they struck up a relationship.
Let's get out of here.
I'm seeing someone. I can't.
It's all right. It can be our little secret.
When Sarah met Ian, things were different.
Sarah is falling in love, but the feeling isn't mutual.
Sarah and Ian didn't even go out. She would just show up and it would be party time.
Same time next week?
Sorry, no can do. Sadie and I are going away.
Ian had been with Sadie, another woman, for a long time, and he loved her. What he felt for Sarah was quite a bit more base.
Ian's two worlds are about to collide on a skiing trip to France.
Yeah, blew down from the top.
Ian and 58-year-old Sadie Hartley aren't expecting guests.
Yeah? Something strong?
Ian. Yeah, that'd be... I don't believe it. This is Ian, an old family
Hi,
friend.
Ian. Oh, David. Hi. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet David.
Despite her love for Ian, Sarah's kept her sugar daddy.
The bizarre nature of this relationship culminated in probably the most awkward holiday anyone could ever imagine. Sarah played footsie under the table as they were all enjoying dinner together.
But when Sarah finally gets Ian alone, she's in for bad news.
No more. You and I are over.
Because of her?
Yes. I love her.
You're choosing that old woman over me.
I think you'd better leave.
She wanted to be the one controlling that relationship. She didn't like it when Ian took over.
She wasn't somebody to be messed with in the slightest. If you hurt her, if you ended a relationship, you could expect a comeback.
You'll regret this.
They say there's nothing like a woman scorned, but Sarah Williams was the epitome of that.
In Helmshire, England, Sarah Williams won't accept she's lost her lover to a rival.
Infuriated, Sarah writes a letter to Sadie outlining every sordid detail of her affair, even down to the type of sex they have.
She'll dump him when she reads that.
It shows in that letter the kind of controlling, obsessive element of Sarah Williams.
She hopes to break up longtime partners Sadie Hartley and Ian Johnston.
She's obsessed. I promise it's over.
Sadie was undeterred by this explicit letter written to her by Sarah.
She is not going to destroy us.
Ian became more dedicated to Sadie, and it blew up in Sarah's face.
Sarah refused to accept that any other woman could have him. It was her or no one.
Sarah has a plan.
This one will do. I need your credit card.
Sure.
And BFF Kit Walsh is right by her side.
Sarah was really the dominant one in that friendship. When Sarah suddenly raised this idea, Kit went along with it.
It's arrived.
The duo go online shopping.
They planted a GPS tracker on Ian's car so they could follow his movements.
You need a stun gun to make sure you don't get hurt.
Good idea.
If Sadie went for them, they could use the stun gun to incapacitate her.
Kit documents everything.
Kit gets swept along in a tide of emotion as she writes down all the details of Sarah's plan to kill Sadie in her diary.
After more than a year of planning, on January 14th, 2016, the women are ready.
Good luck.
Thanks.
They know exactly where Ian is. Away from home, leaving Sadie all alone.
That she believed had ruined her affair with Ian.
Sarah didn't just want to kill Sadie. She wanted to destroy everything about her. Her face, everything.
Sadie's body is left with more than 41 stab wounds.
On some occasions, the 8-inch knife went all the way into the body. That is a measure of the anger that she felt towards this woman.
It's done.
I did it!
While Sarah goes home to clean up, Kit has one job: destroy the evidence.
For all of Sarah's resourcefulness in killing someone,
You know what to do.
They'll never find him.
giving all the evidence to Kit to get rid of was the dumbest thing she ever did.
The boots, the knife, the stun gun and the diary are all hidden very clumsily by Kit.
And the pair fail to cover their digital tracks. When Sadie's body is discovered, suspicion falls on Ian's obsessed ex-lover. Her cell phone is traced to the crime scene the night of the murder.
Cell phones have been putting people in prison for 20 years. But apparently Sarah didn't get the memo.
A search reveals the damning evidence Kit failed to hide effectively.
Besides the stun gun and the knife, they also start to read the diary, which reveals a 17-month plan of action when it came to the death of Sadie.
Don't move! You're under arrest. Give me a hand. Give me a hand.
Their so-called cover-up has been an unmitigating disaster.
In 2016, Sarah Williams and Katrina Kit Walsh are found guilty of murder. Kit is sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years behind bars.
Kit's role in this murder was minuscule compared to what Sarah's was, but she's paying for it just the same.
Sarah is sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 30 years.
The attack on Sadie was one of the most brutal I've ever seen between women.
Sarah's unrequited love led to the violent destruction of an innocent life.
Sadie was a successful businesswoman. She was a mother, by all accounts, of a very loving, kind-hearted woman with not a bad bone in her body.
This was a crime of obsession and barbarity. But this is also a crime that's pure in its motivation. It was pure jealousy. Most people use their words to resolve a conflict. If somebody can't control their anger, that's always going to be a problem for them.
Cleveland, Ohio, 2016. A horrific scene confronts 32-year-old Ashley Schutz. Her husband, 35-year-old Ronrico, is gravely injured. The victim of a hit and run.
Rico! Rico!
I'm sorry.
Babe!
Let them do their work.
What happened?
But Ashley's in for an even bigger shock.
Who did this?
You did, Aunt Ashley.
That's when everything kind of came crashing down.
Oh no! I had no idea.
What happened, sir?
She didn't know I was behind her. She drove over me. It was a mistake.
But you're driving.
One year earlier, Ashley and Ronrico are on a high.
They had a huge wedding. For them, it was symbolic of a fresh start.
A new life for both bride and groom. A time to forget struggles of the past.
This is us. It is grand. It is big. It is wonderful. And this is going to be us forever.
Both Ashley and Ronrico bring children to the marriage. And they waste no time having one of their own.
Oh, look at my baby! I'm so proud of you. Let me see. Oh, he's got his daddy's eyes.
I'm gonna put him down for a nap.
It seemed like for everyone that the two had found happiness together.
You're gonna have your hands full, girl.
We're gonna be all right, Mom. We're gonna be all right.
They were living together in the home that was owned by Ronrico's mother.
New love, full of hope. Ronrico and Ashley are confident they will make it.
perfect.
Who's hungry?
Yep, shut up, you lot. Shh. Yes?
She had gotten a job. She was very active in that community.
Really?
She seemed like everything was on the up.
Okay, great, thank you.
Ashley had a job and was making good money, but Ronrico didn't.
Yes!
He stayed home and took care of their daughter.
I got it. I got a job.
Oh, congrats, my love.
Thank you.
I think this was a problem for her.
The newlyweds begin to discover hidden truths about each other.
I don't understand why he needed new shoes this month.
Would you be saying that if it was your son?
That's the thing, Rico. He ain't my kid. Actually, you know what? Give me my baby.
Just chill.
Excuse you?
The eternal bliss machine didn't last more than a few months before they were at each other's throats.
She doesn't even know who her mama is anyway.
Well, her mama is the one that's keeping this family fed.
Ashley Schutz was quick to anger, and when she angered, she became violent.
It didn't matter who was around to observe her horrible behavior. Her children, other people's children, witnesses to a crime, didn't matter.
I've had it, Mom. I can't do this anymore.
But Ashley doesn't take responsibility. She blames her violence on others.
Honey, give it some time. Marriage takes work.
Work? Rico does not know the meaning of the word.
Ash, be honest now. Have you been losing your temper?
Losing my temper? What is that supposed to mean, Mom? Whose side are you on anyway?
Ashley's mother was talking with her about her temper, and Ashley told her mother that one time she was holding the baby, and Ronrico punched her several times in the face.
He bashes me all the time.
I don't believe that at all.
Ronrico upholds his wedding vows. For better or worse.
Ronrico began to see Ashley as crazy.
His wife starts attacking him publicly.
Rico!
This was Memorial Day weekend. It was a Saturday. As people do to celebrate the long weekend, people were drinking and carrying on. The two started arguing during the day, and the argument carried on throughout the afternoon.
Give it to me.
Whoa, chill, baby, chill. It's a party.
As more drinks were consumed, the argument got more heated.
Ronrico has had enough.
Ronrico threatened to end the marriage.
It's over, Ashley. We're done.
Give her to me! No!
Ashley was enormously upset at the idea of the marriage breaking up.
There's an argument over who's gonna take the child.
She's my child too, you know. It says so on the birth certificate.
Say what?
Ronrico points out that he's the one who signed the birth certificate. It's his child, as well as hers.
Ronrico is playing with fire.
Give her to me! Now!
Stop it. Stop it. Give me that child. You two can take it.
She just wasn't going to let that happen.
What are you doing?
One year after tying the knot, Ashley and Ronrico Schutz marriage is in tatters.
Whoa, hey.
Ashley and Ronrico had been arguing off and on all day.
What are you doing?
No.
On May 28, 2016, They're fighting over custody of their baby girl.
Don't you dare! Get out of my way, now! Get out of my way!
What's wrong with you?
She ran out of the house and ran towards the car, and he ran out to stop her. He was so concerned that Ashley was going to leave with the baby.
Like you said, it's over.
No, you're not. Not with my daughter. Open this door, Ash! Open this door!
He got in front of the vehicle to prevent her from leaving.
Open this door, Ash! Open it!
That didn't stop her at all.
Whoa! What are you doing?
Get out of my way, Rico!
Ashley's idea of conflict resolution was turning her car into an assault weapon. Ashley wasn't content to have hit Ronrico once with the car. She backed up and drove over him again and then dragged him. To get in a 2,000-pound vehicle and use it to ram against the person you're angry at, that's like setting off a bomb.
The children were inside at the time, and the 11-year-old was looking out the window.
Neighbors call the police.
She didn't know I was behind her. She drove over me. It was a mistake.
And strangely, Ronrico keeps their secret. Barely conscious and paralyzed, he is rushed to the hospital.
He had a fractured neck, in other words, unable to move, and he had to have a breathing tube because of all of the fractured bones in his chest and arms and neck.
Ronrico told his mother what he originally told the cops, that Ashley had backed over him by accident, was not true.
She ran me down.
What?
And that she meant to hit him, and she hit him from the front.
I'm going straight to the
Don't tell
police.
anyone.
He also told her, please don't go to the cops with this.
He didn't want the mother of his child in jail, so he protected her. He was thinking of the kids, not himself.
Ronrico is extra cautious because this isn't his wife's first offense.
Pull over, Antoine!
You're crazy!
The father of her 2 previous children had upset her one time, and she rammed into the back of his car with the front of hers.
I've got you now!
She hit it with a large amount of force.
In 2005, she had been convicted of misdemeanor assault and domestic violence.
I've got you! What's wrong with you?
He didn't want her to go to jail again.
Ronrico's mother keeps her promise until 11 days later.
He went into septic shock as a result of the multiple severe injuries that he suffered, and then passed away.
When he died, all bets were off.
My son, Ron Schutz, was murdered, and I know who did it. It was his wife.
Charlotte came forward and said that this is what Ronrico said really happened. So that's the moment the investigation changed.
The police finally opened up an investigation. Based on her story, they proceeded to court.
With testimony from the child witness, a jury is convinced Ronrico's death is no accident.
He was in the neighborhood of 300 pounds and over 6 feet tall. He was a large man. I would think you would know if you ran over him.
In 2017, Ashley Schutz is convicted of murder and felonious assault. She's sentenced to life with a minimum of 15 years.
Ashley is right where she needs to be for the rest of us to be safe.
Ashley's temper couldn't be controlled. She turned the family car into a deadly weapon.
If somebody can't control their anger, and when they get mad, they lash out, that's always going to be a problem for them. She's a dangerous person and always will be.
These deadly women didn't know the meaning of love. Robin O'Neill's jealousy.
The phone rang at 2:17 a.m., slicing through the silence of a small Ohio town where nothing ever happened after midnight. And when the receiver was lifted on the other end, no one spoke, only breathing, slow and deliberate, as if someone wanted to make sure they were heard without ever being seen. And by morning the line would already be dead, the caller gone, the trace evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a question that would haunt this place for decades. Who was still watching, and why now, after all these years? In the winter of 1985, Ohio was locked in a familiar routine of steel shifts, snow-choked streets, and front porches lit by yellow bulbs that buzzed like tired insects. A working-class town where doors were rarely locked and everyone knew everyone, or at least believed they did, until the night a single absence shattered that illusion. Her name was whispered first at the local diner, passed along with coffee refills and nervous glances, a name spoken softly as if volume alone could make it real, because once it was said out loud, there would be no taking it back. She didn't come home. No slammed door. No goodbye. No note on the counter. Just a bed that hadn't been slept in and a radio still humming low static in the dark. The police would later call it a missing person case. Routine on paper, but nothing about it felt routine to the people who stood on their porches that morning, staring down the road as if expecting answers to come walking back toward them. This was Ohio, 1985, and this would become a cold case, though no one used that word yet. Not until the heat had drained out of the search. Not until hope itself had learned how to go quiet. Patrol cars rolled slowly through streets they'd driven 1,000 times. Headlights sweeping across snowbanks and shuttered storefronts. Officers knocking on doors with clipboards already half filled with shrugs and maybes. Because in this town, secrets didn't come easy, and lies were usually dressed up as politeness. The first interviews were calm, almost casual. Neighbors insisting they hadn't seen anything unusual. Co-workers swearing it was just another normal day. Friends repeating the same sentence again and again. She wouldn't just leave. She wouldn't just disappear. As if saying it often enough might make it true. Inside the house, detectives moved carefully, noting what wasn't there as much as what was. A purse untouched, shoes by the door, a calendar still turned to the wrong month, frozen in time like the last honest moment before everything went wrong. There were no signs of struggle, no broken glass, no blood to point at and say this is where the story changes, just an unsettling normalcy that made every object feel complicit, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Outside, the community gathered, volunteers forming search lines through nearby woods, calling her name into the cold air until their voices cracked, flashlights bouncing across frozen ground, illuminating nothing but footprints that could belong to anyone, or no one at all. Each hour that passed without answers added weight to the silence, a pressure that settled over the town, turning familiar streets into something else entirely, places where something unseen might still be hiding. The local news picked it up by evening, a short segment squeezed between weather and sports, a smiling photograph held on screen just long enough to make viewers uncomfortable. The anchor's voice measured, cautious, already hinting at what everyone feared but no one wanted to hear. Missing, mysterious, under investigation, words that landed like stones. Tips came in fast at first, phone lines lighting up with rumors, half-memories, late-night sightings that dissolved under scrutiny, a man seen near the highway, a car idling too long at a stop sign, a scream that might have been the wind. Detectives chased each one because in the early days, every lead feels like the one, every call a possible turning point. But by the end of the week, the stack of dead ends had grown tall. Enough to block the view. Inside the station, maps were taped to the walls, red circles drawn and redrawn, lines connecting places that no longer made sense, officers arguing quietly over coffee gone cold, frustration seeping into every conversation. There was talk of starting fresh, of looking closer at the people nearest to her, because that's where these stories usually collapse inward, but proximity didn't bring clarity, only more questions, relationships that seemed ordinary until examined under fluorescent lights, then suddenly sharp-edged and unfamiliar. Interviews grew longer, more intense, the same questions asked in slightly different ways, voices rising, patience thinning, because someone had to know something, and the longer the case stayed open, the louder that unspoken accusation became. Outside the station, the town changed its habits. Porch lights left on through the night. Children walked to school in groups. Conversations lowering when a cruiser passed by. Fear threading itself into the daily routine. This wasn't supposed to happen here. That was the refrain, repeated like a prayer, because believing it was easier than accepting the alternative, that evil didn't need an invitation, that it could arrive quietly, without warning, and leave just as silently. Weeks passed, then months, the snow melting into mud, the search grid shrinking, resources diverted, the case slowly sliding from the front of the board to the side, not forgotten, just waiting. Waiting for something to change. Waiting for evidence that refused to surface. Waiting for a mistake, a confession, a body, anything that would give shape to the nightmare. Instead, there was only absence, a void that settled into the town's collective memory, becoming part of its identity. A story told in fragments and lowered voices, a cautionary tale without an ending. By the end of 1985, the word cold began to appear in internal memos, a clinical term for a human tragedy, signaling what everyone already felt, that the trail had gone cold, that whatever happened had been carefully hidden or cruelly simple, and that time, once an ally, was now working against them. Files were boxed, evidence sealed, the case number still active but dormant, a sleeping wound beneath layers of bureaucracy and dust. Life went on because it always does, but it went on differently, the absence lingering like a shadow that never quite aligned with the sun. Years later, new officers would flip through those pages and feel the weight of unfinished business. The unsettling sense that something had been missed, that a detail overlooked in the chaos of those first days was still out there, waiting, patient, unchanged. And somewhere, whether in another state or just down the road, someone knew exactly what happened that night in Ohio, 1985, carrying the truth like a second heartbeat, steady and hidden, while the town learned how to live with a mystery that refused to stay buried. A cold case that never truly froze, only waited, silent and watching, for the moment when everything would finally change. Time did not heal this town, it merely taught it how to pretend, and by the early 1990s the streets of Ohio looked unchanged to an outsider. The same brick storefronts, the same diners with fogged windows, the same factories coughing steam into gray skies, but beneath that surface the disappearance had settled like sediment, invisible yet impossible to remove, shaping every conversation that drifted too close to the past. Inside the police department, the file sat in a metal cabinet that screeched when opened, thick with reports yellowing at the edges, witness statements frozen in the language of another decade, and photographs that still seemed to vibrate with unanswered questions. New detectives came and went, some pausing long enough to skim the case, others lingering, drawn in by the quiet gravity of a mystery that refused to resolve, and each of them felt the same thing sooner or later, the sense that this was not a simple vanishing, not a spur-of-the-moment decision or a tragic accident, but something deliberate, something planned, executed with just enough care to leave nothing solid behind. The witnesses who once spoke eagerly now hesitated, memories dulled by time or reshaped by years of retelling, faces tightening when old questions resurfaced, because reopening the past meant reopening wounds that never fully closed. One neighbor swore again that a car had been parked across the street that night, engine running, lights off, but could no longer recall the color, the shape, the sound, only the feeling, the unease that crept in before sleep and lingered into morning. Another insisted she'd heard voices arguing somewhere nearby, low and urgent, but admitted that memory might belong to a different night, a different winter, because after enough years, fear has a way of blending itself into everything. Investigators chased what they could, retracing steps through neighborhoods that had since changed hands, knocking on doors of people who hadn't lived there in 1985, asking about events they only knew through rumor, the answers growing thinner with each retelling. Evidence, once boxed and labeled, began to show its age, tapes degraded, notes smudged, forensic standards evolving faster than the case could keep up, leaving behind a trail of what-ifs that modern science couldn't quite reach. And yet, every so often, something stirred, a phone call sparked by a late-night documentary, a letter sent anonymously with block handwriting and no return address, hinting at knowledge but offering nothing concrete, enough to raise hope, never enough to sustain it. Each tip sent a ripple through the department, officers pulling the file back into the light, rereading lines they'd memorized years ago, searching for a crack they might have missed, only to watch the excitement fade once more as the lead dissolved into coincidence or cruelty. Outside, the community learned a new vocabulary: cold case, unsolved, missing presumed dead, phrases that crept into local lore, whispered to newcomers as a warning disguised as small talk. Parents reminded their children to come straight home, not because the threat was clear, but because it wasn't, because uncertainty was harder to fight than a named danger. Anniversaries came and went, marked by short newspaper articles and fading photographs, the tone shifting subtly over time, from urgent appeals to somber remembrance, as if the story itself was being lowered gently into the ground. The family endured the worst of it, living in a state of suspended grief, unable to mourn fully without proof, unable to hope without hurting themselves all over again, clinging to routines that kept her presence alive, an empty chair at the table, belongings untouched, because letting go felt too much like betrayal. Detectives who stayed long enough carried the case with them, into other investigations, into quiet moments at home, the unanswered questions resurfacing without warning, the nagging sense that somewhere in the maze of early interviews and overlooked details, the truth lay buried under. Assumptions made too quickly, judgments shaped by the limitations of the time. By the mid-1990s, the town had nearly convinced itself that the mystery belonged to history, something tragic but distant, a story told in past tense, until a single development cracked the facade. A former resident, long gone from Ohio, was arrested out of state on unrelated charges, and during questioning, an offhand remark caught an investigator's ear, a reference to the town, to a winter long ago, vague enough to deny, specific enough to haunt. Word traveled fast, excitement flickering back to life as detectives coordinated across jurisdictions. Old files hauled out once more, names circled in red, timelines re-examined with fresh eyes. Interviews resumed, this time sharper, more focused, pressing on inconsistencies that had been politely ignored years earlier, because politeness had gotten them nowhere. The suspect denied everything, smiled at the right moments, claimed memory loss at the wrong ones, and without physical evidence to anchor suspicion, the case stalled again, hope collapsing under the weight of legal reality. The town felt the whiplash, anticipation giving way to exhaustion, the familiar ache of almost, the cruel tease of proximity without resolution. Technology marched on, forensic breakthroughs transforming other cold cases across the country, DNA matches making headlines, long-hidden killers exposed by a single hair or drop of blood, and each success story landed like a challenge, a reminder that somewhere, evidence might exist, waiting to be tested, waiting to speak. The Ohio case was revisited with this in mind, evidence inventories updated, items once deemed insignificant reevaluated under modern standards, but progress was slow, constrained by what had been collected in 1985, by what had been lost to time or mishandled before anyone knew better. Still, the effort mattered, if only because it signaled refusal, a declaration that this disappearance would not be quietly forgotten, that the absence would not be allowed to fade into statistics. The late 1990s brought renewed media attention, a feature in a regional magazine, then a segment on a late-night true crime program, the story reframed for a broader audience, its mysteries sharpened, its unanswered questions laid bare. Tips poured in again, this time from strangers hundreds of miles away, armchair detectives and insomniacs convinced they saw a pattern others missed, the volume overwhelming, the quality uneven, but among the noise were moments that forced investigators to pause, to consider angles never fully explored. The town watched from a distance, wary of hope, protective of its scars, while detectives worked through the backlog, methodically, patiently, aware that the truth rarely arrives with fanfare, more often creeping in quietly, disguised as persistence. As the millennium approached, the case stood at a strange crossroads, no longer fresh enough to demand urgency, not old enough to surrender to myth, balanced uneasily between progress and paralysis. And beneath it all, the question remained unchanged, echoing through decades of silence. What happened on that winter night? Who benefited from her disappearance? And how had an entire community been left holding nothing but fragments, waiting for a moment that might never come, yet unable to stop believing that somewhere, somehow, the cold case was still breathing, still capable of waking up and demanding to be heard. By the early 2000s, the case existed in two parallel worlds, one confined to cardboard boxes and aging evidence lockers, the other living quietly in the minds of people who had never truly moved on. A shared unease that surfaced in unexpected moments, during chance conversations or late-night drives past familiar streets that no longer felt entirely safe. Inside the department, a small group of investigators refused to let the file gather dust, rotating in and out as budgets shifted and priorities changed, each one inheriting not just paperwork but a responsibility that felt heavier with every passing year. They read the reports slowly, line by line, not looking for what was written, but for what wasn't, the pauses in interviews, the assumptions made under pressure, the conclusions drawn because something had to be written down, even when certainty was absent. One detective noticed patterns others had missed, not dramatic revelations, but subtle rhythms, repeated behaviors, witnesses who seemed to orbit the truth without ever landing on it, statements that aligned too neatly, as if rehearsed long before questions were asked. It raised an uncomfortable possibility that the town's silence wasn't just the product of fear or forgetfulness, but something closer to agreement, a collective decision to look away. Revisiting old witnesses proved difficult. Some had moved, some had died. Others answered the door with visible irritation, unwilling to exhume memories they'd spent years trying to bury. Yet, when pressed gently, cracks appeared. A neighbor admitting they'd lied about being home that night. A former coworker conceding that tensions at work had been worse than reported. Small truths slipping out as time loosened the grip of old loyalties. None of it amounted to proof, but it shifted the landscape, turning what once seemed random into something more structured, more intentional. The investigators began mapping social connections instead of timelines, tracing friendships, grudges, debts, relationships that overlapped in ways the original investigation never fully explored, revealing a web that grew denser the closer it came to the center. Somewhere within that web, they believed, was the reason the case had stalled so completely. Outside the department, true crime culture exploded, forums buzzing with speculation, amateur sleuths dissecting every available detail, theories multiplying faster than facts, some absurd, others unsettlingly plausible. The Ohio case became a topic of fascination, its lack of resolution an open invitation for projection, strangers assigning motives, suspects, entire narratives based on fragments pulled from public records. Detectives monitored the noise carefully, skeptical but attentive, aware that sometimes, amid the chaos, a detail surfaced that hadn't been considered, a question no one had thought to ask. One such detail emerged from an unlikely source, a retired officer who attended a local talk about cold cases and lingered afterward, pulling a detective aside to mention something he'd never put in writing, a conversation overheard decades earlier, dismissed at the time as barroom bravado. The name he mentioned wasn't new, but the context was placing the individual closer to the center of the disappearance than previously believed. It wasn't enough to reopen the case officially, but it was enough to spark renewed interest, enough to justify quiet inquiries that wouldn't attract attention or tip anyone off. Those inquiries uncovered inconsistencies, travel records that didn't match alibis, financial transactions that raised questions, behavior that seemed innocuous until viewed through the lens of the disappearance. Still, without physical evidence, every revelation hit the same wall: suspicion without certainty, stories without proof. The family, long accustomed to disappointment, watched cautiously from the sidelines, hope tempered by experience, their trust in the process eroded by years of near misses and empty assurances. They had learned not to ask how close investigators were because closeness meant nothing without answers, and answers had proven elusive. Meanwhile, the town itself continued to change, old factories shuttered, new businesses moving in, residents who remembered 1985 growing fewer with each year. The story slipping further from common knowledge, becoming something younger generations only half understood. And yet, beneath the surface, the unease persisted, manifesting in subtle ways, in the way people avoided certain topics, in the sudden quiet that fell when the case was mentioned aloud. Detectives sensed it during interviews, a tightening of posture, eyes darting, a hesitation that went beyond nostalgia. Someone was still afraid, and fear rarely survives decades without a reason. Advances in forensic technology offered fresh possibilities, prompting a comprehensive review of all remaining evidence, however mundane it once seemed. Items previously deemed useless were now re-examined, fibers, partial prints, degraded biological samples that might, with luck and careful handling, yield something new. The process was painstaking, slow, and often discouraging, each test a gamble against time and degradation. But investigators persisted, driven by the belief that the case's longevity was not proof of its insolubility, but of its complexity. One test, buried among dozens, produced an ambiguous result, not a match, not a failure, but a partial profile that suggested a presence never documented in the original reports. It was a whisper of evidence, fragile and incomplete, but it changed the tone of the investigation, shifting it from retrospective to active, from what went wrong to what might still be possible. The discovery was kept quiet, shared only among a tight circle, because premature exposure risked contamination, legal challenges, or worse, alerting someone who had stayed hidden for a reason. As investigators followed this new thread, they uncovered connections that stretched beyond town limits, linking Ohio to neighboring states, to transient populations that moved through unnoticed, complicating jurisdiction and timelines. The picture grew larger, more unsettling, suggesting that what happened in 1985 might not have been isolated, that the disappearance fit into a broader pattern never fully recognized. Each new realization carried weight, because it implied missed opportunities, other victims, other silences. The burden of that possibility pressed heavily on those working the case, fueling long nights and strained tempers, the urgency renewed not by headlines, but by conscience. Media interest flickered again as rumors of progress leaked, reporters circling, eager to frame the story as a comeback, a redemption arc for a case long considered dormant. Investigators resisted the narrative, wary of overpromising, knowing that momentum could evaporate as quickly as it appeared. Still, the town felt it, a subtle shift, conversations growing more alert, memories stirred, people reassessing what they thought they knew. The past was no longer settled, no longer safely distant, and that unsettled everyone. As leads converged and timelines tightened, detectives faced an uncomfortable truth, that solving the case might not bring the closure everyone expected, that the answer, when it came, could fracture the town's remaining illusions, exposing complicity, negligence, or cruelty too close to home. Yet the alternative, continued silence, felt worse. And so they pushed forward, following the fragile trail left by time and chance, aware that each step brought them closer to something that had waited decades to be found. A truth patient and unforgiving, poised to emerge from the shadows of a cold case that had never truly let go, only watched, waiting for the moment when resistance finally gave way. The partial profile changed everything without announcing itself, a quiet shift that rippled through the investigation like a tremor felt only by those standing directly above it. And as months passed, detectives learned to move differently, to speak more carefully, to treat every conversation as if it might echo beyond the room. The evidence, fragile as it was, demanded context, and context meant people, real lives intersecting with a winter night in 1985, connections that had once seemed irrelevant now pulling focus under the harsh light of renewed scrutiny. Investigators began reconstructing movements rather than motives, charting who was where, not just on the night she vanished, but in the days leading up to it, patterns of behavior that revealed themselves only when viewed as a sequence instead of a snapshot. It exposed gaps, unexplained absences, routine deviations that had gone unnoticed in the chaos of the initial search, when urgency had overridden patience. One name surfaced repeatedly, not as a suspect in the traditional sense, but as a constant presence, someone who appeared in the margins of multiple stories, always close, never central, the kind of figure easy to overlook until the pattern became impossible to ignore. Approaching this individual required caution. Decades of silence had hardened into instinct, and any hint of accusation risked shutting doors permanently. Detectives framed their questions broadly, testing reactions, noting changes in tone, the way certain details provoked defensiveness or sudden clarity. There were moments when the conversation almost tipped, when something unspoken seemed poised to surface, only to retreat behind practiced composure. Meanwhile, forensic work continued, analysts pushing the limits of degraded material, extracting what they could, cross-referencing databases that hadn't existed when the case began, hoping for a match that would turn ambiguity into certainty. Each update brought tension, because progress was incremental, fragile, and easily undone by a single procedural misstep. Outside the lab, the town felt the investigation closing in, even if no official statements confirmed it. An intuition born of history, of knowing when something buried was being disturbed. Old rumors resurfaced, passed with renewed confidence. Names spoken aloud that had once been carefully avoided, as if time itself had granted permission. Some residents welcomed it, eager for resolution, while others recoiled, the prospect of truth more frightening than the comfort of uncertainty. For the family, the renewed attention reopened wounds, grief resurfacing alongside a cautious hope they barely dared acknowledge, because hope had betrayed them too many times before. They were consulted more frequently now, asked to recall details they'd already surrendered repeatedly, to relive moments they'd never escaped, the past refusing to stay contained. Detectives felt the weight of that responsibility acutely, aware that every question carried consequences beyond the investigation, that failure now would cut deeper than before. As leads narrowed, the case's complexity became more apparent, suggesting not a single catastrophic decision, but a series of smaller ones, each compounding the last, creating a disappearance that appeared almost seamless in retrospect. It raised the possibility of assistance, intentional or otherwise, people who had looked away, rationalized silence, convinced themselves they were protecting something or someone more important than the truth. That possibility chilled the investigators more than any individual suspect, because it implied a conspiracy of inaction, a community complicit through omission. Interviews reflected this tension, witnesses hedging, correcting themselves mid-sentence, eyes flicking to the door as if someone might overhear, fear no longer abstract but immediate. One interview, conducted late in the evening, shifted the trajectory subtly but decisively, a former acquaintance breaking down after hours of careful denial, admitting they'd seen something they couldn't explain, a confrontation, brief and heated, followed by a departure that felt final. The details were hazy, shaped by time and guilt, but the emotional truth rang clear, and for the first time, investigators sensed proximity, the feeling of standing just outside the room where the truth waited. Corroborating this account proved challenging. The scene long altered, physical traces erased, but circumstantial elements aligned in unsettling ways, timelines converging, movements intersecting where they shouldn't have. The partial profile, once abstract, now seemed to hover over these revelations, a silent witness lending weight to claims that might otherwise have been dismissed. Legal counsel urged caution, reminding investigators that decades-old cases collapsed easily under scrutiny, that memory was unreliable, evidence vulnerable, and that the pursuit of justice could not afford shortcuts. The warning resonated, tempering enthusiasm with discipline, every step documented meticulously, every conclusion held provisional until proven. Still, momentum built, subtle but undeniable, the investigation's tone shifting from speculative to assertive, from exploration to pursuit. Media pressure intensified, reporters sensing a breakthrough, pressing for confirmation, framing the narrative as a resurrection of justice, while investigators deflected, protecting the integrity of a process that could unravel under premature exposure. The town responded in kind, its collective mood taut, conversations sharper, the past pressing in on the present with renewed urgency. It became impossible to ignore that whatever happened in 1985 was no longer content to remain hidden, that the layers of time meant to bury it were instead peeling back, one by one. As the investigation edged closer to confrontation, detectives grappled with the implications of success, knowing that resolution would not simply close a file, but reopen a community, forcing it to confront choices made under the cover of familiarity and fear. The question was no longer whether the cold case could be broken, but whether the town was ready to face what breaking it would reveal, a truth that had waited patiently, gathering weight, until the moment when denial could no longer hold, and the silence that had protected it for so long finally began to crack. The silence did not shatter all at once. It fractured slowly, the way ice gives under pressure, and with each small crack the investigation gained momentum, not through dramatic confessions or sudden arrests, but through accumulation, detail layered upon detail until denial became harder to maintain than truth. Detectives focused now on pressure points, moments where lives intersected too closely with the disappearance to be coincidental, examining not just what people said, but what they avoided, the subjects that caused voices to falter or stories to shift. One timeline, once considered stable, unraveled under scrutiny, revealing that several key individuals had been unaccounted for during a critical window, their whereabouts assumed rather than verified in the chaotic early days of the search. That assumption, harmless at the time, now loomed large, a reminder of how easily urgency could distort thoroughness. Investigators revisited records thought irrelevant, employment logs, service receipts, handwritten notes buried in unrelated files, discovering patterns that suggested coordination, not necessarily malicious, but purposeful enough to obscure reality. It painted a picture of a night shaped by decisions made quickly, perhaps impulsively, yet followed by years of disciplined silence. The partial forensic profile, though still incomplete, began to align with this emerging narrative, narrowing the field, excluding some names while quietly implicating others. Each exclusion was a relief and a disappointment, because narrowing meant commitment, a willingness to accept that the truth would implicate real people with families, histories, and defenders. Surveillance, subtle and legally constrained, resumed around select individuals, not to catch them in the act, but to observe behavior, the reflexes of those who believed the past was safely buried. Some had built stable lives, pillars of the community, their reputations reinforced by years of normalcy, which made the implications of the investigation all the more unsettling. Others lived on the margins, transient, harder to track, their movements echoing the patterns uncovered in the forensic review. Interviews grew more confrontational, questions sharper, patience thinner, the pretense of routine replaced by the weight of implication. A few witnesses cracked under this shift, offering new fragments of truth, admissions framed as misunderstandings or youthful mistakes, minimizing language that betrayed deeper knowledge. Each fragment required verification, cross-checking, corroboration, the slow grind of building a case from pieces that refused to fit neatly. Meanwhile, the family endured another cycle of anticipation and restraint, urged to prepare for outcomes without being promised anything, a cruel balancing act that left them suspended between dread and longing. They watched as the town's mood turned brittle, neighbors eyeing one another with new suspicion, old friendships strained by revived rumors, the past intruding on the present with increasing force. The media fed on this tension, headlines hinting at breakthroughs without substance, talk radio speculating wildly, pressure mounting on investigators to deliver answers that could withstand scrutiny. Internally, debates intensified, disagreements over strategy reflecting the stakes involved, some pushing for decisive action, others urging patience, wary of collapsing the case through overreach. Legal hurdles loomed large, statutes, evidentiary standards, the burden of proof heavier in cases shaped by time's erosion. One misstep could invalidate years of work, could hand victory to whoever had benefited from silence. And yet, the investigation pressed on, guided by a growing conviction that the disappearance was not an isolated act, but the culmination of tensions that had simmered beneath the town's surface, rivalries, secrets, resentments that found expression in a single, irreversible night. Detectives revisited locations tied to those tensions, not expecting pristine evidence, but hoping for context, for confirmation that the stories they'd assembled matched physical reality. Most yielded nothing, the landscape altered beyond recognition, but one site produced an unexpected response, a reaction from a witness who insisted the place meant nothing, while betraying recognition too immediate to dismiss. It was subtle, but enough to warrant further attention, enough to justify a deeper dive into records surrounding that location, uncovering transactions and access logs that connected back to the same cluster of names. The pattern tightened, possibilities shrinking, the investigation's focus narrowing like a lens. With each step, the weight of the truth grew heavier, the realization that solving the case would not restore what was lost, would not erase decades of absence, but would instead force reckoning, accountability, and perhaps resentment from those who preferred the past remain undisturbed. Detectives felt that weight personally, the responsibility of reopening wounds balanced against the moral necessity of resolution. The town sensed it too, the air charged with anticipation, conversations edged with caution, the familiar comfort of routine replaced by the uneasy knowledge that something was about to give. As the investigation moved toward a critical juncture, the line between patience and paralysis blurred, every decision scrutinized, every delay questioned, because time, once the enemy of the case, had become its catalyst. And in that tension, between what was known and what could be proven, the cold case edged closer to its breaking point, the silence that had protected it for decades thinning to the point where even a whisper might bring it all crashing down. Pressure changed the atmosphere of every room the investigators entered, a density in the air that made even casual exchanges feel weighted, and those who had grown comfortable with the distance of time began to sense that the past was no longer content to remain passive. The focus tightened on a narrow set of interactions, a handful of phone calls placed and received in the days surrounding the disappearance, calls once logged and forgotten, now reconstructed through surviving records and corroborated memories, revealing an urgency that contradicted the calm stories told for years. Detectives listened again to old interview tapes, the hiss of analog static framing voices that sounded confident then, brittle now, hearing hesitation where none had registered before, pauses that felt deliberate, answers that arrived too quickly to be true. One call, placed late on the night she vanished, became a pivot point, its timing awkward, its explanation thin, the reason for it changing subtly with each retelling. It was the kind of inconsistency that meant nothing alone, but everything when paired with a pattern. Investigators pressed harder, revisiting the caller with questions sharpened by years of hindsight, and for the first time, the responses came with visible strain, irritation slipping into defensiveness, composure cracking just enough to suggest fear rather than indignation. Around this exchange, other pieces aligned, a vehicle sighting previously dismissed now corroborated by a second account, a receipt time-stamped minutes later than claimed, a neighbor's recollection of headlights cutting through darkness at an hour when no one was supposed to be moving. Each element reinforced the others, creating a framework sturdy enough to support a theory that no longer felt speculative. The theory itself was grim in its simplicity, an encounter that escalated, a decision made under pressure, followed by a series of choices aimed not at justice, but at survival. It suggested that what followed was not a carefully plotted crime, but a hurried attempt to contain consequences, aided by silence and the town's instinct to protect its own. This possibility reframed everything, turning past reluctance into potential complicity, and explaining why the case had resisted resolution for so long. Detectives tread carefully, aware that accusations without proof could harden resistance, could drive the truth further underground. Instead, they focused on verification, on building an evidentiary spine that could withstand scrutiny, returning again and again to the partial forensic profile, now treated as a compass rather than a destination. Analysts worked to expand it, to extract additional markers, knowing that even a small improvement could open doors previously closed. When a new database search produced a near match, not definitive but suggestive, the room fell silent, the weight of possibility settling in. The individual linked to that match was not a stranger to the case, but someone who had brushed against it repeatedly without ever being named, their proximity normalized by familiarity, their presence explained away by coincidence. Investigators approached this development with measured restraint, confirming and reconfirming, wary of false positives, but unable to ignore the convergence. Interviews resumed, now framed by evidence rather than inquiry, the tone shifting unmistakably. The subject's reactions were telling, surprise feigned too late, explanations overly detailed, an eagerness to control the narrative that betrayed awareness of its fragility. Outside the station, rumors surged, the town buzzing with speculation, alliances forming and fracturing along old lines, loyalty pitted against truth. Some residents pushed back, accusing investigators of dredging up the past for attention, while others quietly expressed relief, grateful that someone was finally willing to disturb the peace that had been built on silence. The family remained largely out of sight, shielded by choice and necessity, their grief now intertwined with the anxiety of proximity because answers, once abstract, were becoming personal, specific, unavoidable. As the investigation edged closer to formal action, legal consultations intensified, prosecutors evaluating the strength of circumstantial evidence, the risks inherent in proceeding without a complete forensic match. The question was not just whether they could move forward, but whether they should, whether the pursuit of accountability justified the potential collapse of a case built painstakingly over years. Each meeting ended the same way, with a reminder that truth demanded patience, that the line between justice and failure was thin and unforgiving. Still, detectives sensed momentum they could not ignore, the feeling that the case was pushing back, offering just enough to demand continued pursuit. A breakthrough arrived quietly, not in the form of a confession, but a document unearthed during a routine review, a maintenance log that placed a key individual at a critical location during a window they'd long denied, a small detail overlooked because it seemed too mundane to matter. In the context of everything else, it mattered immensely. Confronted with this contradiction, the response was immediate and revealing, anger replacing confusion, a demand to end the interview that spoke louder than any admission. It wasn't a confession, but it was a fracture, and through that fracture, investigators glimpsed the outline of what had been hidden. The cold case, long resistant to pressure, began to give way, not through force, but through persistence. Each layer peeled back, exposing another beneath it. And as the town braced for the consequences of revelation, one truth became inescapable. The disappearance that had haunted Ohio since 1985 was no longer just a memory. It was an active reckoning, advancing steadily toward a moment when denial would finally run out of places to hide. The fracture widened under scrutiny, not explosively, but with the slow, grinding inevitability of something that had been under strain for decades. And as investigators leaned into it, they felt resistance shift from quiet confidence to brittle calculation. The individual at the center of the near match began to change routines, canceling appointments, avoiding familiar places, behavior subtle enough to explain away, yet obvious to anyone watching closely. Surveillance logs reflected this shift, movements tightening, interactions narrowing, as if the world had suddenly become hostile terrain. Detectives interpreted it not as guilt-proven, but as fear awakened, the realization that the past was no longer content to stay buried. Interviews with peripheral figures took on new urgency, questions sharpened by the emerging framework, and with that pressure came unexpected admissions, not of the act itself, but of knowledge, of things overheard, favors asked, questions discouraged. One witness admitted they'd been warned years earlier to stop talking, the warning delivered casually, almost kindly, as if silence were a favor rather than a threat. Another acknowledged altering a statement at the suggestion of someone they trusted, convinced at the time it was harmless, that it would protect everyone from unnecessary trouble. These revelations did not stand alone. They echoed, aligning with patterns investigators had begun to recognize, a choreography of deflection and reassurance that kept the truth just out of reach. The town's history offered context, a place where loyalty often trumped accountability, where problems were managed quietly rather than confronted, a culture that prized stability over disruption. In that environment, the disappearance had become an inconvenience to be smoothed over, a tragedy acknowledged but never interrogated too deeply. Detectives understood this instinct intimately because they'd grown up around it, worked within it, and now found themselves pushing against it. The tension was palpable. Colleagues divided between those who saw the pursuit as overdue and those who feared the consequences of tearing open old wounds. Prosecutors weighed in cautiously, reminding investigators that motive and suspicion were not substitutes for proof, that juries demanded clarity, especially when decades had blurred memories and eroded evidence. The near match remained tantalizing but insufficient, a signpost pointing forward without guaranteeing destination. Forensic teams redoubled their efforts, reprocessing samples with refined techniques, squeezing fragments for information they barely retained, the work painstaking and uncertain. Days stretched into weeks, each update anticipated with restrained hope, each inconclusive result a reminder of how much time had stolen. Meanwhile, the individual under scrutiny sought legal counsel, a move anticipated but still significant, formalizing the shift from inquiry to adversarial posture. Communication narrowed, answers filtered through representation, the easy access of earlier conversations replaced by careful distance. To investigators, it felt like another confirmation, not of guilt but of awareness, the recognition that the stakes had changed irrevocably. Media attention intensified again, leaks and speculation feeding a cycle of anticipation and anxiety, reporters framing the case as a morality play between persistence and silence. Officials responded with rehearsed neutrality, refusing to confirm or deny progress, but the town read between the lines, sensing movement where none was acknowledged. Conversations grew sharper, friendships strained, some residents defending reputations as fiercely as others demanded answers. The community fracturing along lines drawn decades earlier. The family, after years of restraint, chose to speak publicly, not accusing, not naming, but reminding everyone that the case was not an abstract puzzle, but a human absence that had shaped every day since 1985. Their words carried weight, cutting through speculation with quiet insistence, reframing the narrative around loss rather than intrigue. Investigators felt that weight keenly, the responsibility to ensure that whatever came next honored that absence rather than exploiting it. A pivotal meeting with prosecutors followed, evidence laid out methodically, timelines aligned, witness statements contextualized. The near match presented alongside corroborating circumstantial proof. The conclusion was measured, conditional, but decisive enough to warrant continued pursuit, enough to justify the risk of escalation. With that decision, the investigation entered a new phase, no longer exploratory, but preparatory, focused on solidifying what could be proven rather than what was suspected. Detectives revisited every assumption, stress-testing their theory against alternative explanations, inviting skepticism to expose weaknesses before a defense could. It was grueling work, emotionally and intellectually, but necessary, because the margin for error was non-existent. Outside, the town braced, sensing that the story it had told itself for decades was about to change, that the comforting ambiguity of a cold case was giving way to something sharper, more demanding. The pressure bore down on everyone involved, the knowledge that resolution, if it came, would not arrive gently, but with consequences that would ripple outward, touching lives far beyond those directly implicated. And as investigators prepared for that moment, they recognized a sobering truth. Breaking the case would not end the story, it would begin a reckoning, forcing a community to confront the cost of its silence and the fragility of the narratives it had relied on to feel safe. The reckoning announced itself not with sirens or headlines, but with a shift in tone, an unmistakable gravity that settled over every interaction, as if the town itself had begun to lean in, listening for what came next. Investigators moved with deliberate precision now, aware that every step would be scrutinized, that momentum could be as dangerous as stagnation if mishandled. They revisited the central figure again, not to accuse, but to observe, to register what changed when the questions were framed with quiet certainty rather than curiosity. The answers came slower this time, filtered, cautious, legal counsel ever present. The conversation drained of the casual familiarity that had once allowed deflection. What remained was tension, thick and unyielding, a tacit acknowledgement that the past was no longer safely hypothetical. Around this core, the supporting structure tightened, witness statements revisited and refined, timelines compressed until contradictions became unavoidable. One witness, long considered marginal, emerged unexpectedly as a keystone, their recollection dismissed years earlier as unreliable now aligning with newly established facts. Confronted with this alignment, they admitted to withholding details out of fear not of legal consequences, but of social exile, of being the one who broke an unspoken rule. Their testimony did not provide a neat answer, but it narrowed the narrative, anchoring speculation to specific actions and places. Forensic updates followed, incremental but significant, additional markers extracted, statistical confidence increasing just enough to matter. It still wasn't the definitive match everyone wanted, but it was enough to reinforce the trajectory, to justify the belief that the truth lay within reach. Prosecutors reviewed the developments with cautious optimism, outlining scenarios, weighing charges against evidentiary thresholds, their language precise, unsentimental, reflecting the stakes involved. They warned investigators again that juries were unpredictable, that time eroded sympathy as much as it did memory, and that the story presented would need to be not just compelling, but irrefutable. That warning reshaped strategy, pushing the team to seek corroboration beyond science, to build a narrative that could withstand skepticism rooted in decades of doubt. Financial records were scrutinized anew, revealing subtle anomalies, transactions that coincided too closely with critical dates to ignore, patterns that suggested preparation rather than coincidence. These findings added texture, motive, a sense of intention that complemented the evolving theory. Meanwhile, the town's atmosphere grew brittle, patience fraying as speculation intensified, some residents demanding swift action, others urging restraint, the divide reflecting deeper anxieties about what accountability might expose. Old alliances resurfaced, loyalties tested, conversations charged with implication even when names went unspoken. The family remained at the center of the storm, their public composure masking private turmoil. Hope and dread entwined so tightly they became indistinguishable. Investigators met with them again, this time not to update, but to prepare, to explain the possibilities without promising outcomes, a delicate conversation shaped by years of disappointment. It was understood on both sides that whatever happened next would be irreversible, that the act of moving forward would close some doors forever while opening others no one could yet see. As preparations continued, an unexpected development disrupted the careful pace. A call from out of state. Another cold case investigator recognizing parallels too precise to ignore. Details exchanged revealed striking similarities, patterns of behavior and circumstance that suggested the Ohio disappearance might be part of something larger. A series of events linked by opportunity and silence rather than geography. The implication was unsettling, expanding the scope of responsibility, hinting at a past more complex and darker than previously assumed. Coordination followed quickly, information shared, timelines compared. The Ohio case reframed within a broader context that lent urgency to its resolution. If these connections held, delay was no longer just a risk to justice, but to understanding the full extent of harm. Investigators felt the weight of that realization acutely, the sense that they were no longer just answering a local question, but contributing to a larger truth that had been fragmented by time and distance. As the pieces converged, resistance intensified, not just from individuals, but from the inertia of systems unaccustomed to revisiting their own blind spots. Bureaucratic hurdles emerged, jurisdictional disputes threatened to slow progress, and each obstacle reinforced the necessity of precision. The case demanded it, the family deserved it, and the town, whether it realized it or not, needed it. In quiet moments, detectives acknowledged their own exhaustion, the emotional toll of carrying a story that refused resolution, but they also felt resolve harden, a clarity born of proximity. They were closer than ever before, close enough to sense the truth's outline even if its details remained blurred. And as the investigation edged toward a point of no return, the cold case shed its abstraction, becoming immediate, urgent, a force pressing forward, insisting that the silence which had protected it for so long could no longer hold against the accumulated weight of evidence, memory, and the simple, relentless passage of time. The point of no return arrived without ceremony, slipping into place through a sequence of decisions that felt inevitable only in hindsight, and as investigators crossed it, they understood that the case had stopped asking permission. Meetings grew shorter, more decisive, strategy narrowing to execution rather than exploration, the language shifting from possibilities to probabilities. Prosecutors authorized a measured escalation, not an arrest, not yet, but actions that signaled intent, subpoenas issued quietly, records seized under seal, witnesses compelled to speak where they had once been invited. The effect was immediate. Phones rang differently. Voices changed. People who had avoided contact for years suddenly reached out, not to confess, but to negotiate, to ask questions that revealed more than they intended. One witness, previously cooperative only in fragments, requested immunity before speaking further, an admission in itself that whatever they knew carried consequences they had spent decades avoiding. In exchange for protection, they offered context, not a smoking gun, but confirmation that key events had unfolded exactly where, and when investigators suspected, details that only someone close could know. Their account filled gaps that had long resisted explanation, transforming speculation into sequence, motive into movement. The narrative that emerged was disturbingly ordinary, shaped by fear, self-preservation, and the belief that silence, once established, could endure indefinitely. As this picture solidified, the central figure's defenses hardened, communication funneled entirely through counsel, public statements carefully crafted to project confidence. Behind that facade, however, cracks widened, behavior growing erratic, associates distancing themselves, loyalty eroding under the strain of scrutiny. Investigators observed these shifts with a mix of caution and resolve, aware that pressure could provoke mistakes, but also that desperation could trigger irreversible actions. They moved deliberately, controlling the tempo, refusing to rush toward an outcome that might collapse under its own weight. Media coverage intensified again, fueled by leaks and speculation, framing the story as a showdown between past and present, a test of whether time could truly shield wrongdoing. Officials responded with disciplined silence, understanding that perception mattered almost as much as proof. The town reacted unevenly, some residents demanding transparency, others retreating into defensive skepticism, the collective psyche oscillating between anticipation and denial. The family, long practiced in restraint, prepared quietly for confrontation, bracing themselves for a truth that, once spoken, would redefine their loss. Investigators met with them privately, outlining next steps without revealing operational details, an act of trust forged through years of shared endurance. As legal maneuvering continued, forensic teams delivered a development that shifted the calculus subtly but decisively. The partial profile refined further, statistical confidence increased enough to withstand expert challenge. It was still not absolute, but in combination with corroborating evidence, it crossed a threshold, transforming the near match into a powerful anchor. Prosecutors reevaluated the case with this update, their earlier caution giving way to conditional approval, a recognition that waiting longer risked losing momentum without significantly strengthening the evidentiary foundation. The decision to act was not dramatic, but it was final. Investigators prepared meticulously, reviewing every element, anticipating defenses, rehearsing questions designed not to elicit confession, but to establish record. The central figure was summoned for a formal interview, the setting neutral, controlled, cameras recording every nuance. The exchange was tense, deliberate, questions precise, answers guarded, a dance shaped by decades of avoidance. When confronted with contradictions laid out sequentially, the composure faltered irritation, flaring, denial hardening into hostility. It was not the collapse some hoped for, but it was revealing, exposing a pattern of evasiveness that mirrored the case itself. Outside the room, the team listened intently, marking moments, noting shifts, understanding that even refusals could carry evidentiary value. The interview ended without resolution, but not without consequence. In its wake, prosecutors authorized the next phase, charges prepared, contingencies mapped, the machinery of accountability finally set in motion. News of this development spread quickly, despite efforts at discretion, the town buzzing with confirmation that the cold case was no longer theoretical. Reactions ranged from vindication to outrage, relief to fear, the community's fault lines exposed in real time. Investigators felt the weight of expectation bear down, aware that the path ahead would be contested fiercely, that every decision would be examined, criticized, second-guessed. Yet beneath that pressure was a steadier conviction, the sense that the truth, long obscured by silence and time, had asserted itself too strongly to be ignored. As preparations for formal action continued, detectives reflected briefly on the journey, not with satisfaction, but with gravity, recognizing that the outcome, whatever it proved to be, would not restore what was lost, would not undo decades of absence. What it could do was end the lie of uncertainty, replace rumor with record, and force acknowledgement where there had been avoidance. And as Ohio braced for the consequences of that acknowledgement, the cold case, once defined by stagnation, moved decisively into a new chapter, one shaped not by what might have happened, but by what could finally be proven, a reckoning delayed but no longer denied. The shift from investigation to accountability altered the rhythm of everything, tightening timelines, sharpening language, and stripping away the ambiguity that had allowed the case to linger in shadows for decades. Legal documents moved through offices with quiet urgency, drafts revised and revised again, every word weighed for precision, because in a case this old, language itself could become a battleground. Prosecutors assembled the narrative carefully, not as a dramatic arc, but as a sequence of facts, each one anchored to evidence, each connection reinforced by corroboration, aware that emotion alone could not carry the burden of proof. Investigators supported this effort relentlessly, revisiting every decision, every interview, anticipating challenges that would exploit the erosion of time, the frailty of memory. Defense strategies emerged predictably, casting doubt on witnesses, questioning forensic reliability, framing renewed scrutiny as opportunistic rather than principled. The town watched these maneuvers unfold with mounting tension, the abstract notion of justice becoming tangible, imminent. Court filings leaked, not officially but inevitably, details seeping into public consciousness, sparking debate and division. Some residents rallied behind the process, eager to see resolution no matter how painful, while others clung to skepticism, wary of condemning based on what they perceived as circumstantial accumulation rather than definitive proof. The family stood at the center of this storm, choosing visibility sparingly, their presence itself a reminder of the human cost beneath legal abstractions. Investigators met with them again, preparing them for proceedings that would reopen old wounds publicly, explaining procedures, timelines, and the possibility of delay, a sobering conversation shaped by realism rather than reassurance. As hearings approached, pressure intensified on all sides, the defense filing motions to suppress evidence, to exclude testimony, to narrow the scope of what the jury would hear. Each motion was contested vigorously, arguments unfolding in measured tones that belied the stakes involved. Rulings came incrementally, some favorable, others restrictive, shaping the battlefield on which the case would ultimately be fought. The partial forensic match, once tentative, now loomed large, debated by experts whose credentials were wielded like weapons, probabilities scrutinized, margins dissected. Prosecutors emphasized convergence, the way disparate elements aligned too precisely to dismiss, while the defense insisted on coincidence amplified by hindsight. Outside the courtroom, cameras waited, microphones poised, capturing reactions, amplifying every development. The narrative hardened, no longer about mystery, but about accountability delayed, a story that forced the town to confront its own role in sustaining silence. As testimony began, witnesses took the stand one by one, voices trembling, memories surfacing unevenly, the weight of decades evident in every pause. Some spoke with clarity, others with visible strain, their credibility challenged, their motives questioned, the courtroom an arena where truth competed with doubt. Investigators listened intently, recognizing fragments of conversations they'd conducted in private now exposed to public scrutiny, each word stripped of context and reassembled for argument. The central figure sat through it all, expression carefully neutral, counsel whispering, composure maintained through discipline rather than ease. Moments arose when the past seemed on the verge of spilling out uncontrollably. A slip of language, a reaction too sharp, but each time, control was reasserted, denial intact. The proceedings stretched on, days blurring together, tension sustained by the slow grind of process. The town followed obsessively, routines disrupted by updates, conversations dominated by speculation, the case consuming collective attention in a way it never had when it was merely unsolved. For the family, each day brought exhaustion and resolve in equal measure, the pain of hearing details they'd never known balanced against the necessity of hearing them at all. Investigators felt the strain too, the culmination of years of work reduced to testimony and exhibits, their efforts subject to judgment by strangers tasked with weighing truth under instruction. As arguments neared conclusion, the atmosphere grew heavy, anticipation tinged with dread, because regardless of outcome, the verdict would not erase the past, only define how it would be remembered. The question looming over everything was no longer what happened in 1985, but whether the system, after so much time, could still deliver something resembling justice. And as the town held its breath, the cold case stood on the brink of resolution, not as a triumphant finale, but as a reckoning shaped by patience, persistence, and the unrelenting demand that silence, no matter how long maintained, must eventually answer for itself. The verdict did not arrive like a thunderclap. It crept in on a morning that felt too ordinary for what it carried, gray light filtering through courthouse windows, the town holding its breath without quite realizing it had been doing so for nearly 40 years. When the decision was read, the words landed unevenly, absorbed differently by every ear in the room, because they were not the clean ending anyone had imagined back in 1985, not the cinematic closure promised by headlines or hope. It was accountability, but partial, truth acknowledged but incomplete, a legal resolution that answered some questions while leaving others suspended in the air, heavy and unresolved. For the family, the moment was both an ending and another beginning, the confirmation that their absence had been real, recognized, no longer dismissed as mystery or rumor, yet still shadowed by the knowledge that not everything had been said, not every action named. Tears came quietly, not of relief alone, but of release, decades of suspended grief finally allowed to move, even if it could not fully settle. In the courtroom, reactions rippled outward, some faces registering vindication, others disbelief, a few anger thinly disguised as disappointment, because the truth, when it finally surfaced, did not align neatly with the stories people had told themselves to survive. Outside, cameras captured fragments of that reckoning, sound bites and expressions distilled into narratives that would never fully capture the weight of the moment. The complexity of a case shaped by time, fear, and silence. Investigators stood back, watching, their role abruptly diminished, years of pursuit reduced to a conclusion that felt both monumental and insufficient. They knew better than anyone that justice, especially delayed, rarely arrives whole, that it comes fractured, shaped by what can be proven rather than what is known. Still, there was a measure of satisfaction, not pride but confirmation, the knowledge that persistence had mattered, that silence had been challenged, that the cold case had not simply faded into history. The town began the slow work of recalibration, conversations shifting, some apologies spoken too late, others never offered at all. Long-held assumptions were questioned, reputations reconsidered, the comforting fiction of collective innocence replaced by a more complicated truth, one that acknowledged how fear and loyalty could coexist with harm. Some residents withdrew, unwilling to engage with the discomfort, while others leaned in, determined to understand how it had been possible for so much to go unspoken for so long. The case became a reference point, a warning embedded in local memory, reshaping how people talked about safety, responsibility, and the cost of looking away. For the family, life did not suddenly become lighter, but it changed texture. Grief no longer suspended in uncertainty, but anchored, defined. They visited places they had avoided, spoke her name without hesitation, allowed themselves moments of remembrance unburdened by speculation. Investigators checked in quietly, not as officials, but as people who had shared a long, difficult road, bonds forged not by success alone, but by endurance. In the months that followed, appeals were filed, debates continued, experts argued over evidence and interpretation, the legal process extending the story beyond its supposed end, because cold cases, even when broken, rarely conclude cleanly. Yet something fundamental had shifted, the central question no longer whether the truth would ever surface, but how the community would live with it now that it had. The town learned, slowly, that resolution did not erase pain, but it altered its shape, transforming it from a haunting absence into a shared responsibility. And in quiet moments, when the noise faded and headlines moved on, the case lingered, not as an open wound, but as a scar, visible, instructive, impossible to ignore. Ohio, 1985 would always be spoken in the same breath as the disappearance, but now it carried another association, a reminder that time could delay truth, obscure it, nearly bury it, but not destroy it entirely. The cold case had been broken, not by a single piece of evidence or dramatic confession, but by the accumulation of patience, courage, and refusal to accept silence as an answer. And though some questions would forever remain unanswered, the echo that once haunted the town softened, replaced by something quieter but stronger, an acknowledgement, long overdue, that the past, when finally confronted, loses its power to dominate the present, leaving behind not peace exactly, but the possibility of moving forward, eyes open, aware of what it costs to ignore what waits in the dark. But the story did not truly end with the verdict, because cold cases never end where the law draws its final line. They linger in the spaces justice cannot fully occupy, and in Ohio the aftermath unfolded slowly, unevenly, like a landscape adjusting after a long, quiet quake. In the weeks that followed, the town discovered that resolution carried its own weight, heavier in some ways than uncertainty, because certainty demanded reflection, and reflection demanded accountability beyond the courtroom. People replayed old conversations in their minds, remembered jokes that hadn't seemed dark at the time, favors that felt harmless, silences that now rang loud with implication. Ordinary memories took on sharper edges, and the past, once blurred by distance, returned with uncomfortable clarity. Investigators watched this shift from the margins, no longer directing the narrative, only witnessing its consequences, aware that their work had unlocked something they could not control. Records requests poured in, journalists digging deeper, uncovering procedural failures, missed opportunities, decisions shaped by the limitations and biases of another era, forcing institutions to confront their own histories alongside the crime itself. Internal reviews followed, measured but necessary, acknowledgments that the system had not only pursued justice, but delayed it, that the cold case had been shaped as much by human hesitation as by criminal intent. For some residents, these revelations felt like betrayal, trust in authority shaken, while others found validation. Their long-held doubts finally mirrored in official language. The family navigated this evolving landscape with cautious distance, choosing when to engage, when to retreat, understanding that public reckoning could not replace private healing. They spoke occasionally, not to relive details, but to emphasize what had been lost in the noise of process, a life reduced too often to evidence and argument. Their restraint carried more power than accusation, grounding the narrative in humanity rather than spectacle. As time passed, secondary truths emerged, not always admissible, not always provable, but persistent, stories whispered now with less fear, fragments of confession offered too late to change outcomes, but enough to confirm suspicions investigators had carried quietly for years. These admissions complicated the ending further, suggesting that the verdict, while necessary, had not captured the full scope of responsibility, that silence had been shared more widely than the law could address. The town absorbed this knowledge unevenly, some accepting complexity, others resisting it, clinging to the comfort of a single villain rather than confronting collective failure. Educational forums were held, discussions about bystander responsibility, about how communities respond to crisis, about the danger of prioritizing harmony over truth. They were not universally embraced, but they happened, and in a place where silence had once been reflexive, that alone marked change. Investigators, now retired or reassigned, reflected privately on the case's legacy, on how it had shaped their careers, their understanding of patience, of justice measured not in victories, but in persistence. They knew the cold case would follow them, cited in training, referenced in policy debates, a cautionary example of how easily truth could be delayed, and how difficult it was to retrieve once time intervened. For the family, anniversaries no longer carried the same suffocating uncertainty, but they were still heavy, marked by absence rather than closure. They learned to live alongside that weight, neither consumed by it nor free from it, a balance forged through endurance rather than resolution. The town, too, learned slowly that acknowledging the past did not weaken it, but refusing to do so had. Conversations became more honest, if not always comfortable, a cultural shift subtle but real. And in quiet moments, when the courthouse steps stood empty and the headlines faded, the story of Ohio, 1985, remained, not as a mystery demanding answers, but as a lesson etched into collective memory. A reminder that cold cases are not frozen in time. They are alive, shaped by every decision to speak or stay silent, to look closer or look away. The evidence that finally changed everything had not been just physical. It had been human, the courage to revisit, to question, to endure discomfort in pursuit of truth. And long after the legal chapter closed, that understanding lingered, a steady undercurrent beneath daily life, ensuring that what happened would not slip quietly back into darkness, that the cost of silence would be remembered, and that the cold case, though officially resolved, would continue to speak, not with accusation, but with warning, echoing softly through a town that had finally learned to listen. Years after the courtroom emptied and the last official document was filed, the case continued to surface in unexpected ways, not as breaking news, but as a low, persistent hum beneath ordinary life, reminding the town that some stories never fully recede. Ohio carried the memory quietly now, not with the panic of uncertainty, but with the weight of recognition, an understanding that the past had shaped the present in ways too subtle to headline. The street where it began looked unchanged to outsiders, the same houses, the same stretch of pavement, but those who lived there felt the difference, an invisible overlay of history that altered how every sound, every shadow, was perceived. New families moved in, unaware at first, until whispers reached them, until a name surfaced in conversation, until curiosity led them to search, and the old story found new listeners. Teachers referenced the case cautiously in ethics discussions, not for sensationalism, but as a study in consequences, illustrating how silence compounds harm, how delay transforms tragedy. Law enforcement academies dissected it clinically, timelines projected onto screens, mistakes analyzed with sterile precision. Yet even there, the emotional residue lingered, an acknowledgement that behind every procedural failure lay a human cost that no training module could fully capture. Investigators who had once worked the case found themselves approached by students, journalists, podcasters, each seeking insight, a quote, a definitive explanation, and each time, the answer remained incomplete, because the truth, even now, resisted simplification. They spoke instead about patience, about humility, about the necessity of doubt, lessons learned not from success alone, but from years of uncertainty. The family watched this continued attention with mixed feelings, grateful that the story was not forgotten, wary of its transformation into content, into something consumed rather than respected. They set boundaries deliberately, choosing when to speak, when to remain private, understanding that remembrance did not require constant exposure. Their grief had evolved, no longer raw, but deeply ingrained, a presence that shaped identity rather than overwhelming it. Memorials took quieter forms, not plaques or ceremonies, but scholarships, community projects, acts of service that redirected attention from the crime to the life that had preceded it. These gestures carried a different kind of power, shifting the narrative away from violence toward legacy. Within the town, generational change brought subtle shifts in perspective. Younger residents, less invested in protecting old reputations, asked harder questions, challenged inherited narratives, and in doing so, continued the work of reckoning begun in the courtroom. Resistance persisted, of course, a reluctance among some to reopen wounds they believed had finally closed, but the conversation no longer felt forbidden. The cold case had broken not only legally, but culturally, altering what could be discussed, what could be acknowledged. Periodically, new claims emerged, individuals stepping forward with memories or suspicions, their relevance uncertain, their timing questioned, yet each adding texture to the understanding of how deeply the case had permeated community life. Most led nowhere legally, but they mattered in another sense, evidence of a lingering need to speak, to be heard, to reconcile personal memory with collective history. Experts debated whether true closure was possible in such cases, whether justice delayed could ever feel complete. The consensus remained elusive, but in Ohio, practice replaced theory, daily life shaped by an acceptance that some answers would remain forever out of reach. That acceptance did not signify defeat, but maturity, an acknowledgement that truth does not always arrive whole, that meaning must sometimes be constructed from fragments. On anniversaries, local media marked the date with restraint, fewer dramatics, more reflection, the tone shifting from shock to contemplation. The language evolved too, less about mystery, more about impact, recognizing that the real story extended beyond the crime itself into the decades shaped by its absence. For those who had lived through the uncertainty, this shift felt significant, a sign that the narrative had finally matured. The case influenced policy quietly, procedural changes implemented without fanfare, small adjustments designed to prevent similar delays, each one a tacit admission that lessons had been learned. No single reform could guarantee justice, but together they represented an institutional memory, a refusal to forget. Investigators, now older, sometimes gathered informally, sharing updates, reflecting on the case not with bitterness, but with a sense of responsibility fulfilled imperfectly but sincerely. They knew their efforts had not been flawless, yet they also knew they had refused to let the story vanish. That persistence, more than any verdict, defined their legacy. The town itself changed pace, less insular, more aware of how quickly normalcy could fracture, how vigilance mattered not as suspicion, but as care. Community programs emphasized connection, communication, the importance of noticing when something felt wrong. These initiatives did not promise safety, but they acknowledged vulnerability, a step away from denial. And still, in quiet moments, when routine settled and the mind wandered, the unanswered questions surfaced, not urgently, but insistently, reminders of what had been lost and what had been learned. The cold case lived on in these moments, not as fear, but as awareness, a subtle presence shaping choices, conversations, priorities. Ohio, 1985, became shorthand for more than a crime. It symbolized endurance, the long arc of accountability, the cost of silence, and the slow, difficult work of confronting it. The story no longer demanded resolution because it had already changed those who carried it. And in that transformation, imperfect and ongoing, lay its final truth, that while justice may arrive late and incomplete, memory endures, shaping the present with lessons carved from the past, ensuring that what once disappeared into darkness would continue to illuminate, however faintly, the path forward. Time kept moving, indifferent to memory, yet the case refused to be left behind, surfacing in moments when the town least expected it, during routine traffic stops, town hall meetings, casual conversations that drifted too close to the past and stalled there, heavy with implication. Ohio had learned to live alongside its history, but living alongside was not the same as forgetting, and the cold case lingered like a low-pressure system, subtle yet persistent, shaping moods, decisions, instincts. Former suspects aged quietly, some retreating into obscurity, others attempting reinvention. Their names no longer shouted, but still recognized by those who knew where to listen. A few carried visible guilt, etched into posture and speech, while others displayed a practiced normalcy that unsettled those who remembered the questions never fully answered. The law had spoken, but it had not exhausted the truth, and that gap continued to generate unease. Investigators, long removed from official duty, encountered reminders in unexpected places, a familiar face in a grocery store, an old report referenced in a training seminar, a late-night call from a journalist convinced there was still more to uncover. They responded cautiously, aware of how easily speculation could reignite harm, yet unable to deny the pull of unfinished understanding. The case had taught them that certainty was rare, that restraint mattered as much as determination, lessons learned through years of navigating rumor and fact. For the family, life unfolded in measured steps, milestones reached with an awareness of absence that never fully faded. Weddings, births, holidays carried both joy and shadow, moments marked by the presence of what should have been. They spoke of her naturally now, not as a symbol, but as a person, recalling humor, habits, small details that had nothing to do with the crime, reclaiming her identity from the narrative that had once reduced it to evidence. This reclamation felt like a quiet victory, one no verdict could grant. The town observed this evolution with a mix of respect and discomfort, reminded that the story was not an abstract lesson but a lived reality for those closest to it. Educational programs incorporated the case more deliberately, not sensationalizing it, but framing it within broader discussions of civic responsibility, ethical decision-making, and the consequences of silence. Students listened differently than previous generations, less inclined to dismiss the past as irrelevant, more willing to consider how quickly ordinary circumstances could spiral. This generational shift unsettled some, comforted others, but it ensured the story remained active, not as rumor, but as reflection. Periodically, law enforcement released statements clarifying lingering misconceptions, attempting to correct narratives that had grown distorted over decades of retelling. Each clarification closed one door while opening another, reinforcing how layered the case had become, how resistant it was to a single, definitive account. Experts debated it publicly, forensic analysts arguing probabilities, sociologists examining community dynamics, psychologists dissecting behavior patterns, each discipline offering insight without claiming completeness. The cold case became a nexus, a point where science, law, and human behavior intersected imperfectly. Media attention waxed and waned, drawn back whenever a new development threatened to emerge, often fueled by speculation rather than substance. The town learned to brace itself, to wait for confirmation before reacting, a discipline forged by experience. Still, the tension never fully dissipated, because the past had taught them how quickly certainty could unravel. Memorial spaces evolved quietly, informal sites of reflection maintained not by institutions but by individuals, flowers placed anonymously, notes left without signature, gestures small but persistent. These acts spoke to a collective need to acknowledge what had happened without reopening wounds publicly. They existed on the margins, unnoticed by outsiders, deeply meaningful to those who understood. Investigators sometimes visited these places privately, not as professionals, but as witnesses standing silently,